us give thanks for our daily bread to the source of all life. The sun shines with all its rainbow colors. Life-giving water falls from on high. Red corn, blue corn, yellow corn mixed up. White rice grows from the green, and the wild rice is still to be seen. The gold wheat and oats and the good brown rye make us a loaf and make us one body, to walk and sing on many legs in many colors. Amen.
Amen.
Yep,
that's me.
Finley, you know what I was going to ask you? And we can talk about this at another time, but you made reference to James Luther Adams. And
yes,
yeah, how has his views been portrayed in this controversy?
Well, interesting enough, Sharon Welch, who is presently a member of the Melville Lombard staff, and of course Melville Lombard has gone whole hog in this white supremacyology direction. She's trying to conflate his opposition to Nazi forms of white supremacy with the white supremacy culture in America today.
Really?
The weakness in that argument is very serious, precisely because, first of all, the Nazis were not white supremacists, they were Aryanists. They felt there were some white people who were not white enough. For them, the top of the heap, white supremacy said anyone who we classify as white is now going to get these special privileges and be a part of a superior class. The Nazis says no, they had a list: Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Eastern Europeans, Poles, even blonde, blue-eyed Poles. Their theory of racism was very tightly hierarchical, based on the works of Wagner and de Gobineau. You had to be an Aryan. That was them, the supreme human being. And all these other kind of white people were sort of like a secondary characteristic. It was similar to the WSP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That used to be the real white people. And then Irish Catholic was sort of brought in, and then Italians were brought in. But the top of the hierarchy was the WASP. So he would definitely be opposed to this type of conflating of the Nazi type of white supremacy or Aryanism with this thing they're talking about today. So I think she is doing a bit of a disservice to try to make him look like he would be today on that side of the fence.
Well,
but
yes, and he can't defend himself one way or the other.
That's right. And the works I've read, he was definitely strong for integration. He was one of the militant integrations. And of course, we know how he helped to integrate the First Unitarian Church. I think that's the story, I've heard it correctly. And so I think this has been really a misreading of his anti-Nazism on the part of Dr. Welch with this new ideology that's out here. So I'm going to definitely raise that with her in a cautious and courteous manner when she comes to speak. You can never see him as an ally, quote and unquote, in this white supremacyology that's out here.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a note, as a tribute to Todd Eklof and his upcoming discussion, we are drinking the Unitarian wine, the 7 Deadly Sins, along with our 7 principles. So.
Great one, perfect.
Somebody tell a joke.
I'll tell one. At the Tulsa conference where Finley and I met,
yeah,
we got a presentation on black and white thinking, pretty much along the lines of what we've been discussing today.
Yeah.
So I remember the next morning, 5 minutes into the same woman's presentation, I leaned over and whispered to Finley, you know, she looks black, but based on what she said yesterday, we know she's white.
Because he had all of those characteristics: authoritarian, perfectionist, dominating. At that Tulsa meeting, it was a very rich experience for me in general. But that was when I'll call her temporary Sister Cole, who later became the power behind the eighth principle, made this statement because of our fights there. We were actually able to set up a multiracial group, but all they wanted was a black person of color, white person of color group. And so as we were walking down the hallway heading to dinner, he gave me this prophecy: you are going to lose. You're on the wrong side of this project. You will be defeated.
I remember that.
That's right. So
I wanted to say that I'm really enjoying being able to see people from all across the country here today. And so it's just been very enjoyable hearing from people from Florida, Washington, East Coast, Midwest, everywhere. So I've really enjoyed matching up faces with names.
I'm introducing Ted Eklof. At this point, I don't think I need to say very much in terms of introduction. We've all gotten to know him very well, and I'm certainly very impressed. Today's been a very good example, and one I haven't seen for a while, of the fourth principle in action in a Unitarian Universalist meeting. And I'm sure that we're all looking forward to Todd's keynote. Further ado, here's Todd Eklof.
It's a privilege to be here, I think, especially during these trying times on many levels, the COVID-19 notwithstanding. So I want to begin by first thanking all of you for being here, especially those who've been able to be with us throughout the day, and welcome to those who are just joining us. And I want to express my wish that you and your loved ones continue to stay healthy. I also want to thank UUMUAC for inviting me to participate, and for the courageous work that this organization is doing to unite our human family. As a lifelong activist, I've often said, nothing makes enemies quicker than promoting peace. And I know as individuals and as an organization, you have sometimes been maligned, your intentions have been misrepresented, and your organization has been ostracized. And amidst all of this, you remain undaunted in your worthy and admirable cause. So again, thank you so much for including me in this honorable organization. I've entitled my address, Tomorrow's Ancestors: Why What We Do Now Matters Most. We are, of course, tomorrow's ancestors, and should remain thoughtful about our obligations to the people of the future. But this phrase is also it also reminds me of something I heard the heretical Catholic priest Matthew Fox say in one of his classes years ago. The ancestors are not speaking to us from the past. They are ahead of us, reminding us of the way forward. I've long remembered that image of the ancestors calling us forward. So this address isn't about ancestor worship or clinging to old ways or social evils that are best left dead and buried. As one of liberty's greatest ancestors, Thomas Paine, reminds us, every age and generation must be free to act for itself in all cases as the ages and generation which preceded it. The vanity and presumption of governing beyond the grave is the most ridiculous and insolent of all tyrannies. Understanding this, that we are not bound to forever obey the echoes of dead ancestors, epitomizes what it means to be liberal, to be progressive, to let go of the habits and the false ideas that prevent us from advancing. If one dwells on the past, then one robs the present, an old Taoist saying goes. But if one ignores the past, one may rob the future. The seeds of our destiny are nurtured by the roots of our past. This is why Judaism's Kabbalistic tree of life grows upside down, with its roots reaching towards Ein Sof, the infinite, because this is the course of our own lives, moving forward in time toward the roots of our past, toward the source, which hold us steady amidst the uncertainty encountered as we venture forward into new and unknown territories. We're all on a long wilderness journey through a vast spiritual desert toward a new promised land, toward the promise of creating a better world for ourselves and others, guided by a cloud of unknowing by day and an ever-changing fire by night. But to get there, the sages of yesteryear remind us that we must remember where we come from, which reminds us who we are and why we're on this journey to begin with. Moving forward, truly forward, means remembering that where we've been and what we've been through matters. If we're not tethered to the highest aspirations that accompanied and have been pursued by humankind since our ancient beginnings, then we become like an unanchored ship tossed about on stormy seas, or a sojourner wandering aimlessly through a clouded night with no stars to guide our way. Without an anchor to hold us steady, or the primordial constellations to guide us on, our journey becomes aimless and our lives pointless. If we ignore tomorrow's ancestors calling us forward to achieve what they could not, then we are doomed only to repeat their worst errors. Consider the Hebrew parable of Noah and his utopian dream. Noah projects his animosity towards human society upon his punitive idea of a God. His anger and fear of others is so extreme, it leads him to the kind of apocalypticism today's researchers consider a characteristic of the fundamentalist mindset, which is also extremist, authoritarian, and punitive. Noah doesn't believe that there is anything good in the world or in humankind, but that everything and everyone ought to be wiped out so he can start over and establish his perfect utopian dream, a world with none of life's prior disappointments. In his need to see himself as the hero of his story, as is true of all of us, he warns everyone of the calamity he predicts is coming. Today's psychologists would call this catastrophizing, blowing our concerns and fears so far out of proportion that we think the world is going to end if others don't see things our way. Noah believes that those who disagree with him are so evil that they deserve to be wiped out, and what today we would call canceled. It's not his fault they disagree with him. After all, he warned them. He can't help if they're unbelievers. They're making the choice to disbelieve. He told them to get on board or else. It's the same kind of belief that would justify eternal punishment of others who simply don't hold the right ideas in their heads. Fortunately, the universalist side of our tradition rejects the belief in everlasting hell, and the Unitarian side holds freedom of thought sacrosanct. So Unitarian Universalists don't ever have to worry about being punished, ostracized, or canceled just because we don't agree with certain ideas, right?
No,
We all know what happens next.
Appreciate it, brother.
We all know what happens next. Noah and his small band of followers shut themselves off from the world by entering the ark that he's constructed for this purpose. They remain cloistered within the exclusive box that he's created, shut off from the empirical world of facts and reason until he sees a rainbow, which his magical mind interprets as a sign. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, he imagines his vengeful God saying, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. The world has been rebooted. Noah gets the do-over he wants, and the new world is full of promise. Things are going to be different from now on. Things are going to be perfect. But do you know what happens next? Not later in Genesis, not in the next chapter, but in the very next verse following the rainbow promise, we find Noah drunk, passed out, and bare naked in his tent. So much for utopia. When his son Ham discovers his father's embarrassing condition, he immediately goes out to inform his two brothers about the patriarch's drinking problem. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backward and covered their father's naked body. Their faces turned away so they would not see their father naked. That's what I call the backward cover-up. When a community uses or community refuses to acknowledge or address the problems, its problems, by turning away to avoid looking at them. Instead, they demonize and punish anyone courageous or stupid enough to point them out. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan. The lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." Canaan is Ham's son, Noah's own grandchild. That's how angry Noah was. Anyone who dares follow in Ham's footsteps will also bear his wrath in the new and perfect authoritarian utopia. Notice how Noah portrays himself as the victim of Ham's truth-telling. The truth hurts, and Ham's words are therefore to be considered harmful. And as someone who is harmful, he is therefore dangerous. We must protect ourselves from danger. We must punish him. We must cast him out. It reminds me of something conveyed to me in a letter signed by over 500 of my UU colleagues shortly after the release of my book, The Gadfly Papers. Those who cannot or will not commit to develop the musculature of resiliency, humility, and lifelong learning required may indeed find that UUism is no longer the appropriate home for their ministries. That's the problem with utopianism. It's premised on the belief that everything before this historic moment of purification is part of the problem and must be abandoned and destroyed before perfection can be achieved. Utopia, a word that means no place, has no roots to hold it steady and no ancestors to call it forward. It has forgotten the hard-earned lessons of the past and is therefore doomed to repeat its same mistakes. Whether it's fictional rainbows that falsely promise never again, or real-life tragedies like World War I, the war to end all wars, or World War II, after which we said, as Noah heard, never again. The wisdom of our ancestors cannot guide us forward if we do the backward cover-up, refusing to see our own faults while demonizing and punishing anyone who dares to point them out to us. Today, our ancient aspirations for freedom and democracy, the best values Western culture has strived for, are being trashed in the name of a rootless utopian vision that seeks to force a twisted version of equality on us at the expense of liberty. This is happening to liberalism and its institutions throughout the Western world, including within Unitarian Universalism. I call it a twisted version of equality because, as the great social psychologist and philosopher Erich Fromm pointed out, it confuses equality with sameness rather than oneness. And that's why I know that UUMUAC is on the right track, because it is not trying to make everyone the same by forcing us to speak and think alike, but by uniting us as one human family that can celebrate and support and be inspired by our unique differences. Sameness means oppression and segregation. Oneness means genuine diversity and inclusion. So the taproots that have held us steady and called us forward for centuries are now at risk of being severed. And with them, and I don't think this is being extreme, may come the end of Western civilization as we know it. In his book, The Demon in Democracy, about totalitarian temptations in free societies, Polish philosopher and statement Ryszard Lindrup talks about the similarities between today's liberal democracies and the communist society he grew up in. He says, both are utopian and look forward to an end of history where their systems will prevail as a permanent status quo. Both are historicist and insist that history is inevitably moving in their directions. It goes without saying that everything in both communism and liberal democracy should be modern: thinking, family, schools, literature, and philosophy. If a thing or quality, an attitude, an idea is not modern, it should be modernized, or will end up in the dustbin of history. Just like last June, like Ham, I attempted to expose the flaws in our liberal religion's impossible utopian vision by reminding us of our roots and of tomorrow's ancestors calling us forward. I thought that I was pointing to the canary in the coal mine, but it turns out the unfortunate creature had already been stiffened with rigor mortis. I was too late, far too late. Shem and Japheth, my own two brothers and sister, UU brothers and sisters, immediately came behind me to perform the backward cover-up, and the next day Noah publicly cursed and banished me as a warning to anyone who might follow my example. And as Lindrup predicts, they did so by shockingly and unabashedly tossing our most ancient values, freedom and reason, into the dustbin of history. Within hours of giving away my book, before most, if anyone, had time to read it, 2 letters emerged that were signed by hundreds of my colleagues, like Ham being cursed the morning after. The first letter libelously claimed clergy of color were faced with the dissemination of racism, ableism, and the affirmation of other forms of oppression, including classism and homo and transphobia, in the book called The Gadfly Papers by Todd Eklof. The second so-called white minister's letter, literally called Logic and Reason, one of the foundational stones of white supremacy, and went on to call freedom of speech arguments a perpetuation of oppression. A month later, I received a letter of censure from the UU Ministers Association, which repeated the claim that logic has often been employed in white supremacy culture to stifle dissent. Aren't you glad to know the UUMA is concerned about stifling dissent? I remain astonished by these claims about 2 of our most cherished Unitarian Universalist values. Reason, to my knowledge, is still listed in our UUA bylaws as one of the fundamental sources of spiritual growth that helps warn us against idolatries of mind and spirit. Instead of a flood, it would appear the new utopian universalist, or Unitarian utopians if you prefer, are holding a rummage sale, and everything must go, including our past commitment to reason and to freedom. These cherished principles, the taproots that nourish our faith, the ancient taproots that nourish our faith, are now considered to be among the evils that have gotten us into whatever apocalyptic mess these neo-utopians dread. Alas, Unitarian Universalism is not alone in this troubling development. It's occurring within liberal societies and organizations throughout the Western world, including in England and Australia, and began in the US on college campuses at least as far back as the 1980s. Philosopher Lou Marinoff has called this, the period we're now in, the endarkenment, because it is the antithesis of the Enlightenment, philosophy of reason, freedom, and the humanistic ethic, which American Unitarianism is rooted in. One of our ancestors, whom I previously alluded to, was the great liberator Thomas Paine. As Bertrand Russell once pointed out in an essay on Paine, his contemporaries were shocked by his Unitarianism, which he expressed most boldly in his 1791 publication, The Rights of Man. Still, you would think, after all Paine had done in the cause of liberty in the United States and in the world at large, his weight would have given him some grace. Liberty for all was in his very bones and sinews, a principle he remained dedicated to and fought for his entire life, even when it wasn't popular, even when it wasn't popular amongst his liberal friends. Upon first arriving in the U.S., Paine became a publisher. Russell says his first publication in March 1775 was a forcible article against slavery and the slave trade, to which, whatever some of his American friends might say, he remained always an uncompromising enemy of. 1775 was also a time when there was increasing talk among the colonies of separating from England. Most were against the idea of becoming disconnected from, let alone at war with, what was the homeland of many. But a year later, in 1776, Paine wrote Common Sense, arguing what else? American independence only makes common sense. It immediately became the most published book of the time and remains an all-time bestseller. It came at the start of the American Revolution, just in time for almost single-handedly turning sentiments in favor of independence. A few months later, during the harshest of winters, 2 days before Christmas, when it appeared the revolution would end in defeat, Paine published The Crisis, which began, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from service to their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph." General George Washington was so moved by this that he ordered it be read to all his regiments, even as they were frozen and starving. It was enough to inspire them to forge ahead and win the revolution. As John Adams summarized it, without the pen of Paine, the sword of Washington would have been wielded in vain. After the successful American Revolution, the people of France decided they also wanted to be free of monarchy. But Thomas Paine was the only prominent American revolutionary willing to support it. Despite the thousands of troops and millions of dollars King Louis XVI committed to the American Revolution. Washington and Jefferson both sided with England, which fought against France. So Paine went to France on his own to help it win its independence and establish a more egalitarian society. After succeeding, however, because of his humanistic ethic, he insisted the victors treat those they defeated humanely, including, Russell says, opposing the king's execution down to the last moment. For this act of charity, Paine was imprisoned by the enraged new rulers, the Jacobins, a radical and ruthless wing of victorious Democrats. Washington and Jefferson left him to linger in prison because his deist theology had made him a political pariah in the U.S. He was scheduled for execution, but became too sick to kill, if you can imagine. Eventually, James Monroe, who was U.S. ambassador to France at the time, secured his release and spent 18 months nursing him back to health. Hated anywhere he went, his life under constant threat, Paine eventually made his way back to the U.S., where he died a recluse in his cottage in New Rochelle, New York in 1809. Only 6 people attended his funeral. Years later, his fair weather friend, William Cobbett, troubled by the desecration of his grave, secretly took Paine's remains back to England, but no cemetery would allow them to be buried. To this day, we don't know what happened to his bones, although in 1884, a Unitarian minister claimed he was in possession of his skull and right hand. This was never verified. Yet during the years that followed, his vital importance to the cause of liberty in the U.S. and in France had been buried and forgotten in a haze of crushing animosity. It wasn't until the 1930s that historians rediscovered his significance, and he again became celebrated as a key revolutionary hero whose commitment to freedom and reason embodies the best of the American spirit. The point here is that even someone as pivotal to the success of liberty as was Thomas Paine can pay a heavy personal price when challenging his own compatriots to live up to their highest values. Paine was a victim of the 18th century version of the cancel culture. A hero who stood for liberty became demonized, ostracized, and all but forgotten because he dared to stay true to his values and challenge others to do the same. So those of us who would pay the price today for sticking to our values, even if it means challenging our own friends, are in great company, if being in great company can be any solace. But solace is not what revolutionaries crave, nor is power, which is the solace of rebels who act very much like revolutionaries, but really only wish to gain power for themselves. A rebel, Erich Fromm says, is one who wants to overthrow authority because of his resentment, and as a result to make himself the authority in place of the one he has overthrown. And very often at the very moment when he reaches his aim, he makes friends with the very authority he was fighting so bitterly against. But a true revolutionary, like Thomas Paine, wants to turn the world around for the good of everyone else in a way that remains devoutly committed to the welfare of and freedom of humanity, friend or foe. Napoleon, Vladimir Lenin, Chairman Mao, Fidel Castro, and Hugo Chavez were merely rebels who ended up replacing one authoritarian regime with another. Thomas Paine, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Nelson Mandela are among humanity's true revolutionaries. I like to consider myself a true revolutionary. At least I strive to be. In my book, I narrow our Unitarian Universalist values down to reason, freedom of conscience, and the humanistic ethic, which were also the values of Thomas Paine, whose shocking theology was Unitarian. As my fellow heretic, Reverend Richard Trudeau, reminded me some months ago, the renowned Unitarian minister, historian, and theologian Earl Morse Wilbur once similarly narrowed the essence of Unitarianism down to freedom, reason, and tolerance. I agree, though I prefer to call the latter the humanistic ethic because tolerance is under this larger umbrella. We tolerate one another, that is, because we recognize that we are one. We tolerate each other when we recognize that we are one. One species, one human family of brothers and sisters, and our beautiful non-binary cousins of every color and creed. It is this third part of our holy Unitarian Trinity I want to speak a bit about before closing. Because I've often been asked, I've been asked to talk about the way forward for our liberal religion, and I believe it is the humanistic ethic that is the only way forward. This group already has a good start because this is also the UUMUAC ethic. with the goal of establishing equality through unity, not sameness, which only results in segregation. It is the humanistic ethic that is also the shared root of both Unitarianism and Universalism. Remember, it was the Unitarians who gave us the first religious toleration law in human history in 1568. And it was the Universalists who insisted that God's love is for everyone, that everyone is embraced by it, and no one should be utterly condemned. And as I point out in the Gadfly papers, it was this principle that finally catalyzed the merger of these two faiths after flirting with the idea for more than a century. Beginning in the 1870s, according to church history professor Ernest Cassera, a new type of universalism is proclaimed, which shifts the emphasis on universal from salvation to religion and describes universalism as boundless in scope, as broad as humanity, and as infinite as the universe. If it is going to be possible for Unitarian Universalism to survive, it's going to have to hear the call of our ancestors calling us forward toward our common humanity, a humanistic ethic that recognizes we are all more alike than we are different, and that we are not so different from one another that we can't empathize and understand each other's suffering, no matter what our gender, color, sexual orientation, or income. This isn't to say that some groups of people don't suffer greater injustices in some areas than others, but that it is only by recognizing our common humanity that such injustices can end. It also means acknowledging that everyone suffers. Everyone suffers, no matter what our prejudices about them might be. And it means we can't help but influence and inspire each other. We can't help but influence and inspire each other. We can't help but influence and inspire each other. It's no more possible for a person of one color not to be moved and inspired by the music or art or culture of a person of another color than it is to prevent them from communicating ideas or communicating codes or sharing genetic information to produce beautiful offspring. For all of us are born with millions of mirror neurons that enable us to build bridges between ourselves and others. This is why even before they're able to crawl, babies begin recognizing the emotions they see in other faces. Have you ever smiled at an infant and had it smile back at you? Humans are natural born empathizers. To expect us to behave differently or to believe we can't understand each other because of arbitrary genetic or cultural differences is as inhuman as it is impossible. The humanistic ethic is humanism with a small h, not the capital H humanism founded in the 20th century. Some people are humanist with a capital H, but all people are capable of being humanitarians, humanists with a small h. Materially, according to Erich Fromm, the humanistic ethic is based on the principle that what is good for humanity, and evil what is detrimental to humanity, which he insists includes the proper care of our environment and our fellow creatures. Hence, he says, the sole criterion of ethical value is human welfare, and the unfolding and growth of every person is the aim of all social and political activities. That's what we should be about. This, I believe, is what our religion is all about. It's what tomorrow's ancestors are calling us toward. A world where, as Dr. King dreamt, people of all colors, and might I add, all kinds of other qualities too, can join hands together as part of one human family, each seeking the well-being and each nurturing the full potential of one another. Human welfare means we must each have what we need to survive each day. Healthy food, safe shelter, adequate clothing, medical care, education, and employment, but it also means the freedom and respect of our persons, the ability to find meaning and to fulfill our chosen potential by fully expressing ourselves. humanistic ethic understands that human beings need both equality and freedom, which can only be achieved through true unity of and respect for the entire human family. That's the way forward, keeping the values that hold us steady. Like the Stoics of old, who recognized meaning and contentment have little to do with the amount of pain and pleasure in our lives, but comes from keeping our greatest values no matter the cost. Listening to the voices of tomorrow's ancestors reminds us who we are and where we've been, so we too can become worthy of being the ancestors of tomorrow's children. That's why what we do now matters most, even if it means, like Thomas Paine or Dr. King or Gandhi or Nelson Mandela and others like them, that we must suffer the consequences of fulfilling our most cherished values: freedom, reason, and the humanistic ethic. May they anchor us in the storms we face and guide us through the darkest of nights. Amen.
Leaping into the breach. Fools go first where angels fear to tread, and I guess that's my place. I was particularly interested and taken by your metaphor, by your notion of tomorrow's ancestors. What we do here, it lays the ground for what will happen in the future, good or bad, and I think this is something that we need to think about, and I thank you for that powerful thought.
I'm just quipping that we were joking here the other day that Thomas Paine too was self-published.
That's democratization. When you can, today anybody can publish.
For good or evil.
Finley?
Well, first of all, as usual, Brother Eklof pushes our thoughts to the limits, makes us think through things. And this is one of the examples where we can disagree and still be in the same organization. We call it having non-antagonistic contradictions. The Unitarian Universalism and communism have a peculiar origin in left-wing Christianity. Both Marx and Lenin were Lutherans. Marx's grandfather was a rabbi, so there's a deep historical theistic element in their vision of the world. And that is a part of the Unitarian Universalist vision of the world as being objectively possible to be changed by human will and understanding. To that degree, though they both started off as in some form of Hegelianism, reason was still a vital part of their analysis, and a lot of their works is anti-irrationality. It is unfortunate that the Bolsheviks used the word communism to describe what was really a Soviet socialist rebellion to overthrow Tsarism. And even Lenin admitted that before he died, that there was no way you could use the Russian Revolution as a model for fighting for communism. By 1921, he had understood that without a proletariat as the majority of the population, you could only have a limited approach. And that's why he went to something called the New Economic Policy, began to open up thought, began to allow debate and discussion, et cetera. And it's only in 1927 when the Stalinist period emerged, and I am not here to attack Stalinism, but like any other bourgeois revolutionary idea, they like to use a good word, communism, in order to fight for a national cause, Soviet socialism. But I think the principle of moving toward a goal in history is a right one. And I am definitely, I guess you would call me a social humanist, And I think that the three forms of social humanism that are reflected some way or another with the Unitarian Universalist value system is populism, government by the people, of the people, for the people, which came, by the way, from Theodore Parker and Abraham Lincoln, they say, borrowed it. Socialism, the welfare state, and communism, the egalitarian classless society. Both of these are human constructions. Both of them are possibilities, but rooted very, very deeply all the way back before Noah into the period of the Neolithic communes or Neolithic communism. In a real sense, the next step forward of the human race is to take the value system of Neolithic communism, participation, cooperation, and community, and after 10,000 years of human history, move into a new stage, which we will call, I call it for want of a better term right now, the beloved community, the classless society, the kingdom of God, the land of Mahdi, the coming of the Messiah. Is all these words which simply mean we escape from necessity to freedom. As Marx calls it, we finally make the break from necessity to freedom, and we are now conscious and no longer leading at some point in human history of a state to tell us what to do. What is happening in the UU is that the Unitarian Universalists was supposed to have been, due to the 1961 development, a humanist religious movement. That was the game plan. That's why we Christians, outnumbered to be sure, but nevertheless we went along with it, because you're telling us, you humanists, that we will be able to replicate the divine imagery of the Old and New Testament and 2,000 years of Christian history. We'll be able to replicate that in human terms. And we'll draft a series of principles that root themselves in those ancient truths to get a better, more glorious, more possible truth. And we were on our way to that journey, heading down that road where we could prove that humanism with a small h could in fact be a positive, not an alternative to theism, but the next advance up from theism. But we got sabotaged in 1967 by this neo-racist movement generated by the Black Power fanatics, and I have to disagree with people who don't believe in causation, funded by the Nixon-Johnson administration. When we went down to Selma, proving that humanists could be as bold as Christians and standing up against racial segregation, suffering martyrdom with Viola Luoso on one side and Brother Reeb on the other, we could prove that humanism could work in and of itself as a power to help to transform the world. Lo and behold, just a year and 2 years later, here comes the Black Power fanatics, led by people like a Jack Milnerson on the one side and I forget those other people on the other side, Sigford and that crowd. They helped to sabotage that possibility by subtly throwing this monkey wrench into the whole multiracial integrating movement. When we had fought so hard for and been martyred for, punkyism was brought out and nasty language and insults and people marching out. It was a terrifying example of what the enemy was prepared to do to prevent the full development of a humanistic religion. Not because humanistic religion in and of itself would have been a miracle, it's certainly been very helpful, but it would have been a part of a broad redefining of humanity, transcending finally race, reaching that moment that Martin Luther King said in that terrific speech, where we'd be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin or the information on the birth certificate. 1968, he made one last daring effort to tie that all together with this Poor People's March. The UUs would be there and others, but we're fighting over how much money, M-O-N-E-Y, how much money we would give to these neo-racist African Americans. The money thing, like a devil in the heart of this movement, brought it to a temporary end. We are fighting our way back to that combination of theism and humanism, in which humanism is always primary. But even we God believers understand that God is helpless, for God has no hands. We are the living hands of God, and he depends on humanity, enlightened and liberated, to finally free us from the chains of Mammon. So I like to say, whew, thank you. Thank you for that presentation. We'll argue about Marx and Lenin later.
Move on to building UUMUAC, call to membership. So Finley and Mary are back in charge.
All right, Marie, let me start by asking you a question. Why are you a member of UUMUAC instead of a member of BLUOCC? You went to their convention down there in in New Orleans, or wherever the hell it was. Why did you say, hey, these black folks are doing all kind of good things, and I'm black and I'm proud? Why did you instead join UUMUAC? Could you share a little bit of your story of your relationship with Blue Arc on the one end and UUMUAC on the other?
As I said earlier, I joined Unitarian Universalists, I think it was 2016. And there was a lot of things that seemed to be happening that I didn't quite understand. There was questions about drum, mostly, that I didn't understand, because I didn't understand the necessity of having separate organizations in an organization that's, I mean, as a Black person joining denominations that's predominantly white, and having organizations that drummed who were talking about separation, separate things, and I didn't quite understand it. So in 2017, there was a Black convening, and I thought that, okay, maybe I will get a little bit more information if I go to this meeting. This was held in Columbus, Ohio, I think. And at that meeting, of course, there were people who were still talking about the necessity of having, you know, separate things at the in our congregation and in our denomination. But the other thing, and you know, there were people who were saying that they were there, they had been UUs for a long period of time, and they didn't feel comfortable, so they had to come to the convening to feel more comfortable, which I didn't understand that either. And but the thing that struck me most is we were there for several days, and I heard nothing about the 8th principle during the time we were there. But on the way home, someone mentioned it to me, and as I looked at this person with a puzzled look, he recognized that I didn't know anything about the discussion that had taken place among some people there about the 8th principle. So then when we, later on that year, there were a pamphlet put out about the 8th principle, and we had a discussion. We began to discuss it. But what I learned, what I learned at the convenient meeting, that the things when they were discussing racial injustices, and my background is, in order to fight for racial justice, you have to have social justice, and you cannot do that by yourself. As people have mentioned, the ideas of Martin Luther King, and multiracial unity is the way to go. So then that's when I decided that I didn't need to get in a group of Black people to discuss the problem of racial justice. I felt it would be much more appropriate, the justice, especially since I'm in a congregation where there are white people, that it would be much more appropriate to discuss those things among the people who were in my congregation. And that's the real reason why I decided that I much rather be in an organization that's multiracial, especially since there's a sign on our building, congregation that says that we are a multiracial, we adopt multiracial unity. And there were just things that I just found conflicted, and I found it much more easier to be in the multiracial group than being in the segregated Black group. Although when the idea came that we should support Black Lives Matter, I was a part of the Black Lives Matter task force, because my understanding of it was that the reason why Black Lives Matter was organized was to fight against police brutality. So that was something that I had been fighting against for most of my political life. But then the ideas changed. They were not fighting police brutality. They were not, that wasn't the only thing. They were also fighting for what they call safe spaces. And I still didn't understand why it was necessary to separate, to go to a meeting of UU congregants, and Black people go in one place and white people go in another. They, in fact, at one of the, I can't remember the exact GA meeting that I was at, but it had to be 2018, where in one of the meetings, after the panel discussed, I can't remember exactly what they were discussing, they suggested that people break out in Black and white groups. And I asked that, I thought we should not only break out in Black and white groups, but we should also break out in multiracial group. And with that, there were like 30 or 40 people who came to the multiracial group. So, those are some of the reasons that I thought that I would much rather be in a multiracial group than to be in, the blue.
We are beginning a new level of our organization, UUMUAC. One of the specialties that makes us very useful, particularly folks who live in places like South Dakota and Wilmar, Minnesota, and other odd places around the world, is that one of the things we do is a special workshop called Telling the Story, Creating Multiracial Unity in Predominantly White, All-White UU Congregations and Fellowships. We deliberately go and do missionary work in these environments in order to show that even though you don't have diversity, which is having actually some people of color scattered about your congregation, you can still celebrate and be a part of a multiracial Unitarian Universalist vision. And in fact, what we do is uncover the multiracial experiences that exist in seemingly all white churches, ranging from music people heard in their youth, artists they saw on television. One of my friends, Ella LaRue's mother, saw a Black princess and thought it was the most beautiful woman in the world. All kinds of ways by which we are in a, if there's a quote white supremacy culture all over the map, there's actually a multiracial desegregated culture, which is the map. The map is desegregation, the map is multiracial unity. And so we go to these places. I went to a place called Kalispell, Montana, right after Trump got elected. Through the workings of God and history, I ended up spending 3 days there. I was on public radio, but Montana Public Radio. We had a workshop with 75 people from the community show up, and we had a sermon the next time on how to fight back against this anti-Muslim racists that were in the area. Even the mayor, somebody from the mayor's office showed up. It was quite amazing. And when they heard that we could talk about multiracial unity in a congregation that had maybe 2 biracial kids, 1 adopted, several Native Americans from that area, it's near Glacier Park, they said they had never heard anything like this. I said, because nobody ever talks about it. Our multiracial reality is primary to this country. They just keep us sliced and diced they keep it out of the way. So that's what makes UUMUAC very, very special. We believe that the average white person who's a member of the rank and file, whether worker, student, or professional, has been impacted negatively by a Negro-phobic racism that was started after Bacon's Rebellion, and they keep bringing it out. Every time we think we got it solved, they bring it out again. And in 1966, since they couldn't get the Ku Klux Klan to bring it out because the Ku Klux Klan had been fully defeated, they got Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown and all that crowd, Floyd McKissick, I knew them. We got in fights down in Atlanta, and they brought out all this mess, hunkies, get out of SNCC. It was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. And it played right into the hands of the Nixon administration. In fact, one of the top agents of the Nixon administration was a gentleman named Dr. Maulana Ron Karenga. And when all of that fight was over in the UUA, guess who ended up getting the money? Ron Karenga. $100,000 went to an agent of the Nixon administration. There's a book about it called Bitter Grave. So UUMUAC now, it should be yellow, but I go with blue. We want to make this pamphlet mass distributed out of every place where you are. Every place. We go into the communities. We go into the trade unions. We want to make the UU principles foundational. Someone asked, can a non-UU join UUMUAC? We say yes, but what's the condition? What is the condition for joining UUMUAC? Does anybody know? What's the primary thing you got to grasp? The first thing.
They need to support the 7 principles, basically.
Support those 7 principles. That's all. Whether you belong to a UU church or not, you must see these 7 principles which you have right here on our side. If you have no objections to this, then come on board. Now we have a brother, has not said anything, I want to grab and embarrass him, Leland Bond Upson. Hi, my brother. Yeah, there you are.
I had to work today.
All right, we're jealous. We got snow here in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
You have just, yep, 2.5 inches.
All the beaches and parks are off limits.
Why did you decide to join this this nefarious organization?
Well, because I had a lot of experience with Blue. I happened to be a minister in North Carolina in Charlotte, and we had the highest percentage of people of color in that church than anywhere I've been. And so we got together and put on 3 teach-ins, and we used the terms white supremacy, even though it upset a lot of people. And I just got a taste for getting down to it, and we don't have anything like that in my part of Chicagoland, except a door maybe. So want to see what you guys are up to, what you believe, what you're doing.
Right. Well, so our position is, of course, as you have heard, we say we defeated white supremacy, but we didn't defeat institutional racism. White supremacy is just one of the mechanisms they used while they could get away with it. And when they couldn't get away with it anymore, they came up with something else, which I call neo-racism, writing a book on it. But then they decided to bring back the term white supremacy as a way to cover up the same reasons that we mentioned about Trump being elected. We needed a language to keep us blinded from the need for multiracial unity. And so we decided to re-victimize white folks and make them the target of being the new minority. And so I think these are the reasons why we believe that this organization, we are never going to leave voluntarily the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. That is not on the table. We believe that we can rescue and reform from the grassroots up the problems that are going on at the UUA coming down. We believe a reformation movement is possible and credible, and we're going to fight like hell to try to make it happen. However, we do not have power to determine membership. They can, like they did with the Lutherans and the Calvinists and others, say there's no room for you here, so we're going to put you out, and we'll try to kill you when we put you out, or as we did in the Reformation, which started off as simply to reform the church, ended up actually turning into a revolution. So we want to have already in place a broad-based Unitarian Universalist vessel with all of that energy that Brother Eklof described and what makes who we and what we are. And to then, as an action-oriented group, to to agitate, to carry out action, to consolidate, and hopefully, the Lord willing, will grow to be one of the powers of positivity that's emerging around this country. We want to see a revival of the trade union movement. Absolutely the part of our vision. We just want to see a revival of community survival activity. So if something happens like the virus thing hits again, we are ready. Our churches are centers of distribution of masks and food and things of that nature. We want to be aware that the catastrophes that are coming down the pike mean there has to be church structures. These church structures, we have a beautiful model in the fellowship system that what Sister Cease represents, the bigger church system. I have lost faith temporarily in the bigger churches, but I have a lot of faith in the fellowships, like where Sister Cease is and where many of us are, little small groupings that are not completely entangled into the bureaucratic structure. So that's our vision. If you have not joined, we hopefully you will join today. Allan Lindrup will now speak about the mechanics of joining and renewing if you haven't renewed.
I'll mention that since we have an audience of attendees, some of which are members and some of which are not members, some of you who may have come just to sample and see what we're about and things like that. If you do choose to join, you basically have two options. If you go to our website, www.uumuac.org, you can join online. There's a tab called Join/Contact. You can fill out some basic information, and there's a donate button there that you can use to make your membership donation. After today, the normal annual rate is $30. Connected with this event, it was $20. So if you make a contribution, let's say within the next couple of days, we can tie it in with the reduced rate that was offered in connection with this event. But you can also choose to send in a check or something like that. And our mailing address is on the website. So you can always, send a check to that address, made payable to UUMUAC, and we'll add you to the membership rolls. You'll get the MAC Journal, which comes out every 2 to 3 months, along with other publications, and obviously emails, etc. But I also want to mention we do have our printed brochures. So anybody who's on this Zoom meeting, if you have an interest in getting a certain number of printed brochures for, handing out at your congregation, or to maybe some unaffiliated you use that maybe they're members of the church or larger fellowship or whatever it may be, you can just, send the message through that contact on the website, or if you have my email, you can email me directly. It's at uusj@sbcglobal.net. But whatever methods, you get a message to me and you say, hey, I'd like to have 15 copies of the printed brochure, we'll get it mailed out to you, okay? So I guess that's what I want to communicate. We will obviously, the board will brainstorm ideas not only to get our petition and other things widely distributed, but also our brochures.
Thank Leah McCoo for the music. Everybody give her a wave for the music, which was so powerful and beautiful. Thank you, sister. You really made an energy. My good friend Keryn Moriyah of MorPROStudio has videotaped this. We'll take a look at it. If it looks relatively good, we'll figure out a way to inform the folks about how well it is, and we'll make it available for reasonable purchase.
I had a question for Reverend Eklof. Will he be making his sermon available, a printed copy of his sermon available? I really liked it.
Allan, any idea what the best way to do that is? Should we have a distribution list?
Yeah, we have a UUMUAC membership list.
It is possible, since we have email addresses of all the people that signed in, is that a possibility we could also send them as one free gift? I think we can allow them to have a copy of the sermon. And I'll make my response in the Mac Arrow.
Our group of 10 or so folks who are opposed to the white supremacy culture stuff are meeting tomorrow for like the 4th or 5th time. And this meeting today is really going to inform what we have to talk about tomorrow. I'm so grateful and I am so tired.
Words. How do we take this energy and thought process and make it do something? I mean, you know, we spent a day talking about things. It needs to go somewhere. What's that takeaway list?
Okay, well, let the members of the board answer that. So let's start with Allan Lindrup.
As I said earlier, most congregations have different avenues where you can raise issues. And so using those avenues, whether they be book discussion groups, forums, you know, congregational meetings, there's different ways you can do it. You make community forums, etc. But I would try to use whatever avenues are possible. Now, some of them may not be available right now with the COVID-19 kind of shutdown. You may have to wait a while. That's possible. But try to take advantage of whatever they are as a way to both generate discussion and understanding within the congregation, and to try to get people, I guess, interested in being more active with these kind of issues within the UUAC. And so that would be my recommendation. Now, obviously, we also have campaigns that we're conducting, like the petition campaign, and so encouraging people to go, you know, to sign the petition. You know, there's a link to it at the UUMUAC website. They can either sign it or get put out if they want to get signatures, etc. Is something we would certainly encourage.
Well, I think some of us have said that it just is encouraging to hear what's going on in other congregations, and we're not alone. And so that's going to be, I just think, powerful in buoying us up to have that support to continue on in the work that we're doing already. But it does seem like we've got a nice group here too today that we should be able to use these numbers to send a message to the folks in power that there's going to be some resistance, I guess, to what's happening. But I'm not sure how we can do this.
I think throughout the day, the things that, one of the points that we have emphasized is the importance of UUMUAC. And not only the importance of UUMUAC, but also the importance of democracy. And without a movement like UUMUAC, I don't see how we can continue to fight for democracy. So if you don't take anything else from this, join UUMUAC, build it, build a movement that's going to not only change our denomination, but change our society.
I'd like to suggest the possibility, if Allan is willing to do this, of sending all of us simply a list of names and email addresses, because a lot of people talk to each other here today. I suspect some for the first time, and to be able to continue a conversation or ask a follow-up question to somebody could be really powerful.
Excellent idea, sort of continuing like a post-convocation conversation. You know, people that always say, hey, I want to talk about this, or I want to question that, you know. We will keep it kind of open format.
Yeah.
You know, so long as we have the operations to do that.
Each of us are in our own worlds, and I think we're each trying to make a serious contribution. And sometimes to be able to connect back with somebody who we know is sort of the same place is really positive.
There was a phenomenon called the Roman roads in a sermon that I once gave about why did God allow the Roman Empire to do what it did, all the evil it did. And in the sermon, I say, he allowed the building of the Roman roads, which then led to the whole process of moving forward to the Christian revolutionary triumph.
I want to close with a little bit of a story from last year's General Assembly. As you know, they have a social justice or social witness event at all of their PAs these days, and this was going to be a march to protest the building of a new jail. Those of us who were leading it, and I was asked to be part of it as the local minister, were to meet the day before at a stairwell in the convention center where it would start, and then we would all march off from there. And while we were gathered around, there was a circle of about 20 or so of the organizers, including President Susan Frederick Gray, and the chief lead on the organization of the event asked me as the local minister if I would lead the invocation before we started with the planning of it. And I'm always awkward actually for a minister giving prayers. One, I'm not what most people would call a believer, but also I've seen that story about the, asking the genie for a wish and you end up messing things up. So I'm always afraid to pray. But I always start off with a little bit of a joke in Unitarian circles. And I say, the Unitarian part of me doesn't know who to pray to, and the Universalist part doesn't know who not to pray to. That usually gets a little bit of a chuckle from Unitarians who are not the only ones who get it. But in this group, sadly, not a single laugh. In fact, there was a nervousness in the room. And the reason I believe for that nervousness is that the essence of humor is that there has to be a benign violation for something to be funny. The joke has to violate some taboo, but it has to do so in a way that nobody gets hurt, which is why over time certain jokes become unpopular. But we have I took it as a sign that we have become so rigid as Unitarians that we have no sense of humor anymore, because any humor itself is a symptom that somebody must have been violated. And the nervousness was everybody looking at each other. Who got hurt there? Who got hurt? That was funny. Somebody must be a victim, right? And it was very sad because humor shares the same root as human, right? To be human is to be humorous, is to have humor, is to be able to laugh. That's why what we're dealing with is an inhumanity. And it was expressed in that example. So my closing words are the way I pray, which is as more of a humanist person, I pray to human beings. And I don't need to invoke the presence of the divine, because I believe human beings, each one of you incarnates your faith and your values. You already embody those. So the divine is already present with us in your life. So my prayer is to you that wherever you go, whatever you do, that you will live out your most sacred values. And I pray that you have the strength and courage to do so. Thank you all so much for allowing me to be part of this special occasion. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Zoom hymn singing led by our choir director, Sister Leah McCoo. Go ahead, Miss A.
Rank by rank again we stand, from the four winds gathered hither, Loud the hallowed walls demand whence we come and how and whither, from their stillness breaking clear. Echoes wake to warn or cheer, higher truth from saint and seer call to us assembled here. Ours the year's memorial store, honored days and names we reckon, days of comrades gone before, lives that speak and deeds that beckon, from the dreaming of the night to the labors of the day, shines their everlasting light, guiding us upon our way. Though the path be hard and long, still we strive in expectation. Join we now their ageless song, one with them in aspiration, one in name, in honor, one. Guard we well the crown they won, what they dreamed be ours to do. Hope their hopes and seal them true, what they dreamed be ours to do. Hope their hopes and seal them true.
That's the vision. And for us, the higher truth, the work we're doing is to build this multiracial vision that we call multiracial Unitarian Universalism. You now may extinguish the chalice, but not the fire that burns within. Be blessed in our efforts. I'll see you when we see you again.
Inch by inch and row by row, I'm gonna make this garden grow and keep my hands on that plow. Hold on. Inch by inch and row by row, all it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Hold on, hold on, hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Keep your hand on that plow. Hold on. Hold on. Inch by inch and row by row, just a little patch to call my own and tune my soul to that song. Hold on. Hold on. Let my rows straight and long, and temper them with a prayer and song. Keep your hands on that plow. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Keep your hands on that plow. Hold on. Hold on. By inch and row by row, Lord, please bless these seeds I sow and keep our hands on that plow. Hold on. By inch and row by row, keep them safe and warm below till that rain comes tumbling down. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Mother Earth will make you strong. Hold on. Pulling weeds and picking stones, we are made of dreams and bones. So keep your hands on that plow. Hold on. Hold on. Grain by grain, sun and rain will take our place in nature's chain. Tune your body and your brain. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Oh, keep your hands on that plow. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Oh, Mother Earth will make you strong. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on.